welcome to this edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. Now let's go immediately in medias res. After this tumultuous week, we ought now, I think, to try to offer a comprehensive, as comprehensive as we can make it, judgment of what it is that has occurred, what the strategic implications are, and what people of goodwill need to do. Because responding to these things is sure, to some extent, a matter of analysis, but it's above all a matter of action. It is not enough to know or to believe. One must act. The good works are necessary. Knowledge or faith alone will not do it. You will not be saved by that. It's got to be actions. Now, we look at these Paris attacks, and it seems to me that we are quite possibly in the presence of a phase change in the internal dynamics of terrorism, just as over the time period of September, October, we began to see a change in the mechanics of the world process. And this, of course, has to do with the Russian presence in Syria, but also a series of other events, right? Faction fights here in Washington, the refugee crisis striking Europe, and many other things. But when it comes to terrorism, here is what I would recommend. The more or less automatic analytical concepts that have been in force for the past 15 or so years, in other words, since about 9/11, September 11th, 2001, I think some of those concepts are now obsolete. And I say this as probably the individual who's done more than any other to create these concepts and to spread them. I've got here a copy of the 5th edition of my book, 9/11 Synthetic Terror Made in USA. And if we look at Chapter 2, and I think this is pretty similar in the other editions, that one is called The Theory and Practice of Synthetic Terrorism. And right there, I tell you, the original title for this chapter was The Theory and Practice of State-Sponsored False Flag Synthetic Terrorism. Call it synthetic terrorism for short. And I go on to say this terrorism is synthetic because it brings together the efforts of a number of disparate components: patsies, moles, professionals, media, and controllers. It is also synthetic in the sense that it is artificial. It does not grow up spontaneously out of despair or oppression or anything of the kind, but it is rather the product of an effort of organization and direction in which factions of intelligence agencies and governments play the indispensable role. Now, that was 9/11. That was false flag, meaning that the world was told bin Laden, Osama bin Laden in a cave, and the 19 hijackers, and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and Ramzi bin al-Shib, and Mohammed Atta, and Hani Hanjour, and Jarrah, and the rest of them. They did this. Well, of course, they couldn't do it. And the big effort, the big point was they lacked the physical capability to do it. It was out of the question. It was like Dallas with Lee Harvey Oswald and all those shots in so little time hitting President Kennedy. But at the same time, I always pointed out, Al-Qaeda exists, and they can blow up a supermarket or a bus. And of course, if you get a lot of Al-Qaeda together, they can blow up a lot of buses and a lot of supermarkets, and they can take over a city or maybe even a region. The one thing that they could not do was to orchestrate 9/11. But now, have not things changed? I think they have. And I would point in particular to the testimony of General Lloyd Austin, the U.S. CENTCOM commander here in Washington around the middle of August, I guess it was, where poor General Austin was forced to admit that after $500 million of expenditure, the U.S. had been unable to field more than half a dozen moderate terrorists or moderate terrorist patsies in Syria. So it meant that the holdings of the U.S. in the patsy milieu had been radically reduced. And I think you have to interpret that broadly in the sense that what Austin was pointing to was a fact that the U.S. terrorist franchise, the CIA and Pentagon terrorist franchise, had been radically depleted. So now we get the Paris attacks. And here's what I would say. There were a lot of people who were calling this false flag before there was any flag. The flag goes up either when somebody claims it, or the media say it, or a government says it, or what have you. And a lot of people were already chanting false flag before any of that had happened. So I think what this means is a conceptual abuse. And in particular, two terms, gladio and false flag, it seems to me are not relevant, or not very relevant to what happened here in Paris. So I would say it is certainly state-sponsored terrorism. ISIS is a state. It controls territory. It has armed forces. It has intelligence, maybe not agencies, but it has intelligence divisions. And their specialty is, of course, this kind of blind terrorism, right? This sort of indiscriminate killing. That is what they do. So they've now exported that to Paris and to other countries in general. But we'll go through it. It comes in the middle of a pattern. And you have to ask yourself, is ISIS a reasonable suspect for having put that bomb in Beirut the previous week that had killed 50 people? I think it is. We've now got the conclusion that after, I think, stubbornly and not wisely resisting the obvious, the Russian government has now also said that their airplane over the Sinai was brought down by a bomb placed by ISIS. And then, I mean, we have other ones, right? We have the attempt to attack that train from Belgium to France. We have any number of examples, but above all, now we have Paris. And it seems to me that the Paris attacks fit more or less in this pattern. Now, there is the lie-hop side of it, which I'd like to treat perhaps separately. But here's the idea. ISIS is in big trouble. Without understanding this, you may not understand what the motivation is for ISIS to do this kind of stuff. Remember, if we go back to, I guess it's Lucius Cassius Longinus Ravilla, the consul of the Roman Republic in 127 BC. This is the guy who said, "Cui prodest scelus is fecit," right? The one who benefits from the crime is the perpetrator, or I would say is the prime suspect. This is the famous cui bono analysis. I would say the cui bono is that ISIS is losing. They're on the ropes. They're a paper tiger whose myth of invincibility has been stripped away by the Kurds and by those gallant female Kurds, right? The lady Kurds have, I think, done yeoman service in showing that ISIS really is very vulnerable and very mundane and very incompetent when you really get down to it. Right? Obviously, what else can they be? That an anti-human genocide cult simply does not have an attraction to large groups of people, right? To a bunch of marginal sociopaths, okay, but not to the middle class of a large country. It's impossible. So the cui bono is that ISIS is losing, and we can see specifically how damaging that is for them. And they need victories. They need glory. They need victories. They've got to reacquire that aura of invincibility. The Western media are eager to re-endow them with the aura of invincibility. So they need to attack foreign countries. They need spectacular attacks, and they also need bombastic threats. They need blood-curdling rhetoric that they're going to attack New York and Washington and Rome. I think we need to take all of that with a grain of salt. And we'll be back in just a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. Now, I am taking this opportunity to call your attention to a number of things. First of all, to the daily briefing of the Tax Wall Street Party. It's free. You can subscribe anytime. You can do this through tarpley.net. If you go to tarpley.net, you find the text of the daily briefing. Scroll down to the bottom. There's something you can click on, a bar, click on the bar, and you give your email address, and you get the daily briefing then through email. And at the same time, I would also urge you to go to twsp.us. This is actually the simplest way to do it, also from our point of view. twsp.us, Tax Wall Street Party.us, which is the Tax Wall Street Party, and that there you get directly. You don't have to click on anything more. You're practically there as soon as you start. So that's the easier of the two. twsp.us. Get the daily briefing. Now, this past week, because of this emergency, I taped a statement. It's about a 30-minute statement in English and in French. En français, disponible en français. So that is a series of ideas about what had happened and what should be done, and these are largely what I'm summarizing right now. But this is a video with sound, of course. So it's a film, and it's my address to the French people and also to Americans. What are you going to do about this, right? Enough of the commentary. We need to know what to do, and I do know what to do. Close the ISIS supply corridor between Jarablus on the Euphrates and the area of Efren and Aleppo. Cut the ISIS supply line. Interdict it. Shut it down. No more traffic. No more oil. No more gasoline. No more ammunition. No more spare parts. No more food. No more fanatical recruits. And destroy ISIS. Destroy ISIS within 1 month. With this, you have solved the refugee crisis in Europe, at least tendentially, and you've also set up a situation where terrorism can be significantly exterminated compared to what it is right now. But now, again, why did they do this, and what is the benefit? They need glory. They need victims. They need victories. They've got to show everybody how ferocious they are, that they're the biggest sociopaths of the lot. Now, the controlled media hide this fact, right? They say, oh, ISIS is expanding. If you look at these Republican presidential candidates, they're insane. As I'll tell you later, I would say this is the week where the Republican Party went from majority reactionary to majority fascist, and in which now the Nazis have more or less stuck their heads up, starting with Trump. Trump and his Nazi triumph of the will. We're sick of this stuff. It's despicable, un-American, and it's going to create a tremendous harvest of hate around the world. A lot of people are going to die because of the loudmouth rhetoric of these Republican scoundrel swine. So we'll get to that, though. But here's the idea. ISIS is losing. ISIS has been defeated in Sinjar by a combination of the Kurds and the U.S. Military aviation. The ISIS line of communications between Mosul, their largest city, and Raqqa, their capital, has been cut because Sinjar has been taken by the Kurds, and a 25-mile stretch of Highway 47 has been seized. So that's a big defeat. It essentially cuts the terrorist caliphate into two parts, right? Again, like taking Vicksburg, just as that cut the Confederacy into two parts. That's the role of Sinjar. We had that report from Thierry Masson last week, and our broadcast was just about the same time as the taping of it, at least, was just about the same time as the Paris terror events. We learned from Thierry that in this Aleppo-Palmyra area, the Russian airstrikes have killed lots of terrorists, and a lot of them have run away. Somehow the glories of martyrdom don't seem quite so attractive when they can come down on your head any time of day. Congratulations to the Russians. The Russians are still running a 10-to-1 superiority over the U.S. in combat sorties. And this week we saw something also highly interesting. We saw Russian long-range bombers clobbering Raqqa. So that's another defeat. In other words, the French have clobbered Raqqa. The Russians are doing so. The U.S., I think, has done a few sorties also, but not enough. So with the 10-to-1 sorties, Russia to the U.S. and these bombers coming in, we'd have to say